It's 15 months and counting for the Russia-Ukraine war. This week, the collapse of the Nova Kakhovka dam in Ukraine. It's one of the biggest ecological disasters in Europe in the last few decades. It's still impossible to say whether the dam collapsed because it was deliberately targeted or if the breach could have been caused by structure failure. The dam and hydroelectric power plant are under Russian control and therefore inaccessible to independent investigators. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is describing the situation as an environmental bomb of mass destruction. Meanwhile, the chorus for Ukraine's inclusion in NATO continues. Ukraine's former defense minister has said that the alliance should admit Ukraine not sooner or later, but now, because the country is the world's best enforcer and a state that can do much to ensure Europe's safety. In the meantime, UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and US President Joe Biden held wide-ranging talks at the White House too. The leaders reiterated their unwavering support for Ukraine. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Kyiv to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as well. Let's try and get in a sense of perspective in terms of where this war is headed and how is Ukraine's counter-offensive shaping up. And for that, I'm joined in by Jamil N. Jaffer, who is the Executive Director of the National Security Institute at the Quincy Institute. Many thanks to you, Jamil, for joining in. What will Ukraine's dam disaster now mean for the war, and is it expected to impact Ukraine's counter-offensive?
Well, obviously, the breaching of the dam on the Dnieper River obviously is a huge issue. We're talking about almost 18 million gallons, or liters, cubic meters of water that are behind this dam that have now been flowing out across. It's flooding significant areas, hampering drinking water for people downstream. But also, it's worth noting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, the largest nuclear plant there in Europe, it's been shut down for a while. But it draws its cooling water from the dammed area, from that reservoir. And so it's starting to get less water. Now, their pumps are able to work and are functioning fine. And these 5 reactors are in a shutdown mode, 5 to 6 reactors. But the challenge is that in the long run, if they can't continue to draw water, that could create a potential situation where you need to bring water in from the outside to cool those cores that are still obviously hot and will remain hot for many years.
Right.
And so those are some of the challenges that this dam breach is causing. It's the drinking water issue. And the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that are the key issues when it comes to the dam.
Right, Jamil, even though Ukraine has still not officially announced their counter-offensive, what are the major tactical challenges for Ukraine's offensive?
Well, Ukraine hasn't officially announced the beginning of the counteroffensive, but we know that they've begun to press Russian forces in a variety of places. We've heard about significant fighting in Donetsk, in Bakhmut, right, in Kherson. And so we know that there's active fighting going on, and it does appear the Ukrainians are pushing in a strong way. The question is whether they'll be successful and how successful they'll be. Obviously, they're continuing to receive a significant amount of supplies from NATO and the West. Those Abrams tanks and the Challenger tanks that have been promised, they're still being trained on. Those aren't in the fight quite yet. And the F-16s are still months away from getting in the fight because it's going to take months to train up the Ukrainians and bring them into the fight. So some of those key capabilities aren't there. At the same time, they do have those HIMARS missiles, the Patriot defensive capabilities and the like, and all of that is really coming into play. And so the question will be how much of a push can they make? How far can they push the Russians back off of their current lines? It's unlikely this counteroffensive will push the Russians completely out of Ukraine, but it may make a significant dent. And if they do, the question is, what will the Russian response be? And how are the Russians able to coordinate their activities between Russian regular forces and the Wagner forces run by Yevgeny Prigozhin?
Right. Many thanks to you, Jamil, for bringing in your precious perspective to this news story. And with that, let's now